Welcome everyone to the Power Core Podcast, where we discuss, review, and fanboy over anything and everything Marvel Strike Force. Now, get ready for two of the most mediocre gamers in the cosmos. It's your hosts, Hebrew Hammer and the Irishman.
Hello listeners, and welcome to the Power Core Podcast. My name is Jangles, and I'm pleased to present to you the first episode in our new debate series titled Master Debaters, in which our expert commentators will explore the recent Ant-Man controversy. I'll be your host and mediator today, and also joining us on the official Power Core debate stage in my kitchen are my esteemed colleagues, Hebrew Hammer and the Irishman. Gentlemen?
Hey Jangles, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to a healthy and lively debate with Mr. Hebrew Hammer over here.
Yes, thanks for having me too. I'm hoping for a very civil debate above anything else.
As you all know, the Ant-Man event is well underway, and in typical MSF community fashion, the online debate is quickly becoming quite heated. Today we will attempt to extricate the various factors contributing to the controversy, and hopefully you, our listeners, will walk away from this debate better informed and better equipped to eviscerate anyone that disagrees with your stances regarding Marvel Strike Force. Now, on to the format of our debate. Each of our debaters will initially have 5 minutes to state their cases, followed by an additional 3 minutes each for rebuttals. We'll then wrap things up during our conclusion segment, in which either debater will have 3 minutes for any final words. But first, I'm being informed by our breaking news team that we have reports of yet another controversy developing. It appears that the Thanos raid has returned. Irish, Hebrew, what are your thoughts?
Oh man, do I have some thoughts.
This is a good one.
I'm actually going to let Hebrew start us off real quick.
So usually I come in defense of Fox Next on most of their decisions. But with this particular one, it really makes no sense to me. First of all, they should have definitely called it a Mega Orb raid instead of a Thanos raid, because that's what it is. It's not a Thanos raid.
Absolutely.
And second of all, giving shards to the top 1% of the population to have a better Thanos than the rest of us is not the best idea. And it kind of reminds me of whenever they gave double drops to those very same people before, whenever we had the Thanos raid.
This is such a give and take. So basically they teased us with Thanos, coming, and then suddenly people go, oh, let's start the Thanos raid, and then they look at the rewards and they're like, really? Like, only people that 100%, the biggest one, is going to get Thanos shards? Like, man, it's just so disconnected. It really is. Like, this is something that was, in my opinion, easily avoidable, and it's something that they shouldn't have done while they're handling this Ant-Man debacle currently. Like, it's just wrong time, wrong place, and they missed the mark here, in my opinion. So,
yeah, I like that they actually did the raid and an event, two separate entities this time. I actually like that they did that.
But, I'm not against that either.
Right, yeah. I know. We're actually in agreement on this one.
Yeah.
But, I think that they should have if they would have just named it a Mega Orb raid and not included the extra shards, I think it would have been perfect. But calling it a Thanos raid and then only giving Thanos shards to those people is just not right.
And that concludes our breaking news segment. Thanks, guys. Back to our regularly scheduled programming. Let's go ahead and begin with a coin toss. Irishman, due to our proximity to your apartment, I'm granting you the home field advantage. Please pick a side of the coin.
We'll go with heads.
Heads. Call it. It's actually a dice, so we'll call that evens.
Evens.
All right, here we go. Hey, it's even. You get to start. Irishman, you may begin.
Thank you, Jangles. So, I believe that when it comes to video games in general, that there are certain levels of expectations and certain levels of excitement that revolves around certain events in the lives of these video games, right? And that is not limited to only console or PC video games. That extends to mobile gaming as well. As an avid gamer, I have experienced many and much turmoil over the years regarding these expectations that are set, and then they are sacrificed for gain, or what others would call greed. I have several points that I'd like to make regarding the recent Ant-Man event. The first point I would like to make is probably the most obvious and the most glaring, that immediately right as you start the Ant-Man event, and that is the double RNG. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows what double RNG means, right? When it comes from a probability standpoint. This is basic math. You will learn this in probability and statistics if you haven't learned it already. And anytime you add two probabilities together, you actually multiply them, right? And that gives you the final probability. For instance, let's say we have a 1 in 5 chance to get orb fragments on a energy pool on one of the nodes, right? That 1 in 5 chance, now let's say we take those orb fragments and now we want to cash them in on a Ant-Man orb. That let's say that for example's sake, that probability is 1 out of 5, right? So 20% and 20%. When you combine those probabilities, it takes it down to 1/25th of a chance, right? So when you add probabilities together, it automatically decreases their chances, not just flat in a flat way. It decreases it in an exponential way, right? So that is the first issue I have with the RNG. Now, I'm not saying that Marvel Strike Force has a 1 in 25 chance of getting Ant-Man shards out of an orb or anything like that. I actually believe that they did compensate for that RNG. Still, whenever you have two RNG elements, that's 2 opportunities to fail instead of 1 opportunity to fail. And by adding that in, it undermines the prior events and how they played out. And that would be my case for, or I should say, against double RNG.
Will that conclude your opening statement?
Yeah, I don't need any more time. Thank you, Mr. Jangles.
Thank you, Irishman. Hebrew Hammer.
Yeah, so there's a couple things that I want to mention about this. First of all, I think you need to redefine failure in your eyes for this, because whenever it comes to the double RNG aspect, keep in mind we've always had orb RNG, right, which is fine, but you're always going to get a baseline. The only extra bit that they've added this time for RNG is the drop rate, of course, but they counterbalance that with the fact that we're looking at 2 characters instead of 1 this time. And some people are thinking probably, well, we had Cable too with Deadpool. But you gotta remember, only 90% of the population did not get Cable. Only 10% of the population did. And from what I've experienced in the life of this game, they pretty much always have a number of what the average player will hit whenever it comes to whenever it comes to stars of a new character. And how they get you there might be different, but it seems like in this case, they are compensating with this RNG aspect with higher drop rate of shards more than the baseline whenever you pull. And you can also start it earlier for players that can't get into raids and things like that for the previous ones. Now new players can. It's more independent. So I think that double RNG in this is just, they're counterbalancing it with other factors that aren't as obvious.
Let's go ahead and open up for rebuttals. Irishman.
I'd like to go back to what you stated, Hebrew, about 2 characters. Mm-hmm. And as of right now, we don't know how the Wasp event is going to play out. I don't think we can factor in the Wasp yet in this debate. And I'm not claiming that the Wasp is going to compensate or is not going to compensate based on what we've experienced so far. So I find that irrelevant to the topic at hand. We will see how her event plays out whenever she's released in 2 weeks. But until then, we can't really commentate on it with any sort of authority, right? So that's regarding your first statement. Regarding the second one, when you were saying that it gives new players the opportunity, whereas the raids did not give new players the opportunity, I'd like to ask Jangles here a question. So it takes getting to level 20, correct, to get in the raid and to have the opportunity to find Thanos or Deadpool, as we saw in previous events. Mr. Jangles, how long did it take you to get to level 20?
I do not recall exactly how long it took. I don't know, like a week maybe.
I remember it being rather quick. It was surprising, and I actually remember it was only about 3 or 4 days that it took you to get to level 20. It took a lot longer because, as we see with level progression, it takes longer as the higher you go. And so I don't find that a strong argument when it comes to that, because people that have been playing the game and have already had their expectations set are the ones that are up in arms, not the new players, right? So yeah, that would be my rebuttal to your rebuttal. So.
Can I take the rest of my time to rebut?
You want to rebut his rebuttal to your rebuttal?
Yeah.
Excellent. Let's do it.
All right. To that I would say, I know that Jangles is a hardcore player, and I know that he ran through those levels, and I would say that it did take him about a week to do so, and I don't think that is what we would consider the average length of time that it would take people to get to that level. So I don't think that that's fair to say that people were just fine getting those other characters. And also, along with that, you do have to remember that whenever we had these raids, for people who were doing the first raid and the second raid, and even the first tier of the first raid, like, they were getting very little orb shards.
I'd like to interject. I'll
allow it.
Anecdotally, I know this is an anecdotal argument because it's a personal argument. But for me, I remember, because you gave me a hard time about it, that I refused to join a alliance for the longest time, correct? And I remember joining an alliance about in the middle of the Thanos raid. And I still walked away with a 3-star Thanos who had 70 out of 80 shards. So I'm 10 shards away from having a 4-star Thanos. This was me at level 25, and I was still able to get a 3-star Thanos without any problem. Where currently what we're seeing is that, especially for newer people, they're only able to complete the easy and not the medium or the hard on the Ant-Man campaign. And what that means is that there's less drops of orb fragments for Ant-Man, and they're currently reporting that they're opening an orb every 2 to 3 days. And at that rate, after 14 days of 2 to 3 days, let's say the minimum, right? So what's that? 14 divided by 3, you're looking at 4...
Like 4 point something.
Yeah, 4.6 or something like that. So you're getting about 4.6 drops. Let's assume that you get a 15 drop in there. So, and the other 2 are 5 drops. Then you're looking at 20, 25, 30 shards of Ant-Man. Not enough to get Ant-Man in the first place. And your argument that it's better for newer players to be able to get him falls flat.
I would like to say another thing about that then, was that there was a lot of people that did not get Thanos whenever he was out because of the reasons that I just said. A lot of the population did not. And I want to also point out that, yes, you did join a alliance later on than other people did, but you were also a much higher level because you refused to join an alliance for the longest time. So you were a very high level for first joining a decent alliance. And you were...
I got in a really good alliance.
And yeah, you got into a really good alliance.
Yeah, I was the lowest person in the alliance for a long time.
Yeah.
So.
But because of those two factors, that helped out immensely. And
you also have to remember... I wasn't just able to get Thanos, I was able to get him almost to 4 stars.
But another thing that you have to remember is that you were able to, because of your level, you were able to run through the Thanos campaign. That's where people did not get a lot of the shards that people that were higher level did.
I wasn't able to run through it. My alliance was.
No, not the raid, the campaign.
Oh, the Thanos campaign.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's where most people got around 80 shards or so.
That's another thing, though, is that they bucked during the Ant-Man. Is the prior to events, you were able to run through the campaign, and you walked away with almost 60 shards.
Yeah, and I think it was even more than that, but. Regardless,
it was 66 for Deadpool is what I remember.
Yeah, for Deadpool it was less starting out. I think for Thanos it was like 80, 85 or something like that. Wow. But which brings me to my next point. I don't think I think it's too early to attack them because we don't know if something like that is coming down the road. Just because they didn't do it before this time doesn't mean that they won't do it after. And I know that we don't know that yet, but we also can't discount that, considering every single time we have gotten, in some cases, actually in both cases, we've gotten some before and after.
Well, I can't argue against a negative. So,
well, I'm just saying we have to keep stuff like that in mind. Just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean that it won't happen.
But that still doesn't that doesn't dismiss people's anxiety when it comes to the campaign itself. Because, again, Foxnet's lack of communication. If they were to communicate, hey guys, don't worry, we're gonna have a campaign that will get you more shards. That would put out the fire that we're seeing currently on the forums immediately.
But that's the thing, is that I don't want to. I want to be able to be surprised in this game, and I think that us demanding always knowing whenever something is going to happen because it happened last time or something like it happened a time before is not fair and also not fun. At least, and that's subjective, obviously, to me. But I think that a lot of people don't pay attention to that particular aspect of it.
Since we're about 14 rebuttals deep, I'm not sure.
Sorry.
I was not timing any of this. Irishman, would you like about 30 more seconds to wrap up your rebuttal since Hebrew was the last to speak?
No, I think we've covered both sides equally. So.
Okay, then I think we're going to go ahead and move on to our audience question section. And by audience question, I mean questions that we wrote ourselves and already kind of know the answers to. So let's. We've got 6 questions to choose from, and I'm going to roll a die to decide which one I'm going to go with. Question number 3. Was this controversy easily avoidable, and why? We're going to start with Hebrew.
So I personally think that this quote-unquote controversy is a bit of an overreaction, and I don't think that it was something needing to be avoided. I think that this was just them experimenting on a different method of releasing a new character, and I think that just in general, whenever they release these characters, these event characters at least, they have a plan of what they want you to get to, and like I had mentioned earlier, it is simply just how we unlock them is basically an illusion to give us a little variety in the game. We're always going to end up with what they want, basically, on average. So I think that it was cool that they experimented with a different method, because I think that raids were getting a little monotonous, and I like the fact that we also get gear with this too. I think that that's cool. So yeah, I hope that they do more stuff like this in the future with trying new things, and I think that jumping down their throats prematurely will keep them from doing stuff like this, potentially. And I don't want them to stop experimenting with stuff like this. So,
okay, Irishman.
I'm not going to deny that they were experimenting. They clearly were experimenting. And like all experiments, some are successful and some fail. I would say, regarding the communities aspect, this experiment did fail. Regarding the monetary aspect, who knows? That information is not made publicly available, correct? So, I think from... You're shaking your head, Hebrew. Do you want to say something?
I'll let you finish first.
Would the affirmative team please remain silent out of respect for the opposition team?
Thank you, Mr. Jangles. Yeah, so back to the case I was making is I do believe that the experiment did fail, and on top of that, you said always ending up with what they want. I feel like that takes away the RNG element if it's always going to be dictated by what the Foxnext team wants us to have. And don't get me wrong, I do think there needs to be a baseline as far as, okay, if you are an avid player of the game, you should be able to walk away with an Ant-Man. I think if you're lower level, you came in a little bit later, and you're not near as dedicated as some of the other hardcore players, then your Ant-Man should not be near as powerful. But that's the problem, right? Is that the hardcore players aren't walking away with a 5-star Ant-Man. After the math, you're looking at pretty much a 3-star guaranteed. but a 4-star if you go hardcore. And that includes, and everyone's math on the forums has proved this, that it's going to take 150 cores to keep that number alive, right? So, and I would also like to point out before my time is up that the gear argument is a straw man. I'd like to throw it out.
All right, well, thanks.
I do have a rebuttal to this. So yeah, I think that with these event characters in particular, I think that it is mostly an illusion of RNG. Most of the time, we have seen everyone pretty much end up on the same thing with Thanos and Deadpool. Everyone always ended up on like one of 3 different numbers, pretty much. And for the Thanos raid, it was even less varied from there. So I think that, yeah, there is a bit of illusion going on whenever it comes to these character shards and what they want us to get. So it goes with that.
So that's your belief.
From what we've seen so far, that has held true every time. So I think what we can extrapolate from that is that there's kind of a number that they want everyone to hit. And whether we get there or not kind of depends on our level. We'll probably get a little bit lower than that if we are a lower level, get a little higher if we're a higher level than the average. And I think that's kind of what they count on. So along with that, with the 150 cores a day and everything like that, because these things require energy and we get items, I just basically supplemented my 150 that I would have put in my campaign energy to my Ant-Man energy because I'm getting items from that anyway. And so I just use it for that, and I'm also getting Ant-Man shards. And it's already been proven, like on the forums, like you said, that with the math of 150, you're probably going to end up with a 4-star Ant-Man. If you do anything less, you're probably looking at a 3, and if you're newer or something like that, you're probably going to be getting a 2.
Cool.
Rebuttal to the rebuttal?
Well, I'd like to answer your initial question, if that's okay. So you asked if this controversy was avoidable.
Oh.
And I would like to state absolutely, unequivocally, it is avoidable. And there are 2 suggestions that I'd like to make that would easily fix this issue. Number 1 is remove the RNG from the frag orb, or the, Ant-Man orb fragments, right? Make it a guaranteed drop. But when you make it a guaranteed drop, lower the amount, right? And by doing that, you could also lower the daily limit. Because as of right now, I don't know anyone, and I'm talking to whales as well, that they are not hitting that daily limit on those nodes because people, once you hit 100 cores to refresh a node, people are looking elsewhere at the other core or at the other nodes that are available to refresh. So I think it's a 2-pronged approach. I think you lower or you remove the RNG element from the Ant-Man orb frags. You still have RNG with the Ant-Man orbs, just like normal events. And then you lower the amount per drop and decrease the cap per day. And in that way, everyone has satisfaction with every single roll. Sure, you're not getting as much on, because some rolls you're going to get 100 or 200 on nodes. Maybe they reduce that to 25 or 40. But at least it's consistent. And that the RNG elements aren't playing against you twice. And they fall more in line with the previous raids of having only 1 RNG element. I believe that would put out this fire that's taking place on the forums. And they would have had a smooth sailing release, and people would have been bragging and talking it up like they did with the Deadpool and the Thanos raid. Because ideally, every event that follows should up the other one, right? Or should one up it. I don't think when it comes to these events that people should each event is going to be less exciting than the previous one. So I think that's how you grow a community and grow a game.
Okay, back to Hebrew Hammer.
Yeah, I just want to point out a few things here. First of all, I don't think that every event needs to supersede the other because I think that gets you into dangerous territory very quickly. You can't just
talking
up
about
the odds.
Excuse me.
I would request
opposition team, the affirmative team is speaking.
I'd like to clarify. Just main events. I'm not. This is excluding Flash and the Iron Man events. I'm talking about events that have literally they change the splash on the page.
I'm actually talking about events too, so that's fine. So yeah, I'm talking about events as well, and I don't think that it should supersede the previous one every single time because then eventually you're getting to events where you're getting 7-starred characters, and that's not really good for anyone, at least not right now. So I don't think that it should be doing that. I think that a little more variation is good. And like I said, we do know something about the Wasp. It was data mined that she's coming out, and it's going to be coming out in an event similar to Ant-Man. So from what we know so far, we can guess that she's probably going to be playing out similarly to Ant-Man, and that we're going to be gaining shards of her as well. And assuming that is correct, you got to remember we're looking at now 2 free event characters as opposed to 1. And I know that isn't a definitive thing that's happened yet, but nonetheless, that's something that we have to pay attention to, because right now we're only a couple days in. We don't know what's going to happen, and it might not seem fair right now, but at the end of this, it might seem incredibly fair. And I think that that's something that we just can't disregard. And as far as the double RNG aspect, like I mentioned earlier, the drop rates for orbs above the baseline have been noted as higher than the previous ones. So I think that plays a factor in this. And the drop rate for the orb fragments have... by the way, I'm not sure if I said orbs or shards, but I'm talking about for the baseline for the shards have been noted as being higher than the previous ones. And the drop rate for the orbs are somewhere floating around a little above 30%, if I remember correctly from Casino's breakdown. So I think from everything that we've seen so far, it isn't terrible. Is it the absolute best way to introduce a new character? Maybe not. It's a little more subjective. I don't have too much of a problem with it, but I think in these kinds of things, especially in a game in its infancy, you have to approach these things with a little more understanding and not get furious with the developers for trying new things, especially when we ask for new things. In the previous raids, we had asked that we wanted a new delivery method, and we got it, they tried it, and people might not like this particular one as much, but they can change it. They might even change it during this event on the drop rates. And so I think that experimenting is always good. Will it always be perfect and on the mark every single time? No. But should every single Redditor go up in arms because of that? I don't think so either, because that will make them never want to experiment with anything again, and then the game's going to get really boring really quick.
So we began this debate. I think we were going to have like 6 segments. It's basically become a free-form discussion. So what I'm thinking is I'm just going to give you guys like 5 minutes for some back and forth, and we'll like do some closing statements after that.
And I'd like to clarify. You presumed that whenever I said each event should be either just as exciting or more exciting than the previous event, you interchanged that with me somehow claiming that everyone should be able to get 7-star characters.
You were vague. Sorry.
I was purposely vague because I want the game to be, exciting from different aspects, not just from shard drops. I think a part of it is the dopamine effect that these games can have, and I would argue that the dopamine effect was decreased in this event because of the lack of drops that happen. So, for instance, whenever you have 100 Ant-Man energy, and then you drop it all on a single node and you don't get any Ant-Man fragments, which has happened to me. That's extremely disappointing. It does not get me excited about the event, and I don't have that dopamine release that I look for in this game. I know it's pretty primal, but that is something that I expect from these type of games, is to have that little dopamine release. And with this, it is clearly not nearly on the same level as Thanos or Deadpool. So, and it's because of that ability, think of it this way, right? So with Thanos and Deadpool, that because there was only one RNG element, and that RNG element always guaranteed Deadpool shards or Thanos shards, you had that release, right? Where this, because you have 2, you have an opportunity where you don't get that release, right? And where you're expecting it, and then you get that release later on, right? So you're extending that experience for very little gain. You're creating more animosity than pleasure in that experience whenever you could just avoid the animosity and just make it exciting throughout the entire event. So that's my case when it comes to saying that this controversy was easily avoidable. I'm not saying take out the RNG element of it. Of course not. We want the RNG element. I'm saying that doubling down on the RNG element is going to leave more probability room for missing out, right? And but that would be my case when it comes to the controversy easily avoidable. But I did not say that I expect people to get 7-star characters out of the event. Quite the opposite. The other thing is every character in the game is free. You can't use that as an argument. Every character is obtainable without money in the game. It's just a matter of working towards it. So
I'd like to interject and say that is not true. Whenever every character in the game is free eventually, but there are lots of characters that are locked behind paywalls for a very long time, as we've seen. So I think that's important to note as well. We can't just have every character free whenever we want it. We eventually get it at a, maybe even in some cases years down the line. So I think that...
So every character is free eventually.
Every character is free eventually, yeah. But people aren't that patient. I mean, as we've seen, that's why people buy cores. That's why people buy cores to use for orbs to unlock characters very quickly.
So I'm not arguing against that.
Yeah,
I'm
just saying that saying a character's free, so whatever, isn't a good argument, because that's not what this game is based around with their microtransactions.
All I'm saying is that every character eventually is free. So saying, hey, you're getting a free character here, it's like, oh well, I mean, that character is eventually going to be free anyways. Like, how's that an argument?
Well, then I would say, then what are you so worried about with Ant-Man this time if you're going to get him for free eventually?
Because the prior expectations that were set with Deadpool and Thanos.
But I think that's the problem, is that if it doesn't follow the exact same path as previous...
You're saying that I expect the exact same thing to play out, and that's not true.
It sounds like you are.
No, I'm perfectly okay with them, experimenting with, campaign nodes and having to farm nodes to get Ant-Man orb fragments and stuff like that. I'm just not okay with creating more opportunities to miss out on Ant-Man when they could be avoiding that. It's the double RNG that I have a problem with. Mm-hmm. The other thing is it's the lack of communication, right? So, releasing this event and then expecting people just to accept it is whenever they've delivered on the previous 2 events in a really satisfactory way. I just think that's something that they could have easily avoided. Like, why engage in that whenever they could have just dodged a bullet that was going 1 mile an hour, right? So I do want them to experiment, but going and creating obvious opportunities, or not opportunities, obvious flaws within it, especially from the community standpoint, being able to say, hey, this is something that is clearly a cash grab, especially the whole requiring 150 cores every day.
Not required.
150 cores a day?
You are not required to spend 150 cores a day.
If you want Ant-Man...
A 4-star Ant-Man.
No, if you do not drop... So in order to get an orb every day, mm-hmm. you have to drop 150 cores.
Casino already worked out the math, and it ended up being, if you spend 150 shards every single day for the event period, that you will most likely, given the average pull of 8 shards per pull, that you'll end up with a 4-star
8 shards per...
Yeah, average of 8. So that's given the baseline and what we've seen so far from the statistics analyzed from several people on their pulls. So it's been averaged as 8 per pull. Because you're going to have ups and you're going to have downs, right?
Well, yeah, obviously.
So yeah, you're looking at an average of 8, and that's on the lower end of the median.
Well, I mean, you still have to drop 150 cores to get to that.
To get the 4-star Ant-Man, yeah.
Where with Deadpool, I was able to get 5 stars without dropping any cores on it.
Yeah, but hardcore players were only able to get Thanos to 4 stars.
What are you talking about? What?
Thanos was only able to get... hardcore players only got Thanos to 4 stars, really, except for beta players who got him to 5.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, I mean, they almost got him to 5 stars, because
half.
I was very casual, and I'm 10 away from getting him to
4
stars.
I was a hardcore global player on one of the best alliances in the game. We ended up getting I got about halfway through 4 stars, and I just want to point out that with Ant-Man specifically, you aren't required to drop 150 cores. You can get him at 2 or 3 stars from the math, and you can get him up to 4 if you want to drop those 150 cores per day. Which I recommend if you want to supplement your campaign energy for your Ant-Man energy, because you're basically getting a lot of the same things anyways. And I just want to go ahead and just reiterate that we still don't know if we're looking at another character along with that. So, I mean, what if we're able to 3 or 4 star, potentially 2 characters here? Like I said, we don't know that 100% yet, but we also can't fully discount that. At least I think that it's something that should not be discounted.
With that, we're going to go ahead and move on to our closing statements. I believe we're going to start with Hebrew this time. 2 minutes. 2 minutes each.
So yeah, for my closing statement, I would go ahead and just want to tell people that we just shouldn't jump to conclusions about this event. It's still early. The statistics that we know so far point to us getting a decently starred character, maybe potentially 2, and so we need to just keep our expectations at a normal level and just remember that the game is still in its infancy and not everything is going to be the same or better than the previous event in various facets. And along with that, I also want to point out that the star difference functionally between characters from 2 to even 5 doesn't really make that much of a difference in the grand scheme of things. It really has more to do with kit and utility. You could argue that for raw damage, it makes a bit more of a difference, but we're not talking, 6,000-7,000 here. The biggest star increases, or power jumps and star increases come with 5, 6, and 7, more so 6 and 7 than anything else. So even if it is a lower star character, they are still very much viable. And these events we know will be returning as well.
All right, thank you, Hebrew. Irishman.
So I just want to throw a quip out there. So returning like the Thanos raid returning? Okay, anyways, I'd like to thank...
You mean the Mega Orb raid?
Yeah, exactly. I'd like to thank Jangles and Hebrew for having me here to discuss and have a lively and healthy debate. I'd like to end by making some quick points that I believe summarizes the angst that the community currently has towards this release. I think the first point is double RNG reduces the satisfaction during gameplay. It inhibits dopamine release, and it's just basic science right there. You got to have sparkles to make it fun. I believe this controversy was easily avoidable, as I stated earlier. By deciding to embrace that controversy on FoxNext's side, it creates a more pessimistic light from their reputation stance. They advertise Ant-Man, not purple gear. And I think that's one of the cases that a lot of people are making, is that you can get purple gear. I'm like, well, Ant-Man is the event, not purple gear. I'd rather have Ant-Man and not purple gear at all, and just go from there. And then the overall experience has become monotonous, which wasn't a problem if they did address those earlier issues. And I think the overall point that I'm trying to make is that this undermines prior expectations. Expectations is everything, and especially when it comes to games. And one of the things that they can do to create a solution for that is a very simple and easy solution, and that is to communicate. I believe if you communicate with the community, not only are you going to be able to address issues on the fly, you're going to create a more forgiving atmosphere from the community standpoint, because you are embracing them rather than sitting on the sideline and trying to navigate it from a calculating perspective, right? So jump in head first, join the community, be a part of it, and that way, whenever these controversies do happen, we will be more forgiving, and we'll move on quicker than we have with this most recent release.
Thank you, gentlemen, for a lively debate. I also want to thank our beautiful and esteemed audience members for joining us today, and I'd like to invite all of you to participate in the ongoing conversation on our new official Discord, which you can join by going to www.discord.me/PowerCore Podcast. And don't forget to like, rate, comment, review, and subscribe, and we hope you'll join us next week on the Power Core Podcast.
See you guys.
Peace.